Welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. Great to have you in the conversation today. And again, just to close the loop on the Student Religious Liberties Act in the state of Mississippi, I pray that this will become a model legislation for the entire country. It's based on existing law. There's nothing groundbreaking about this. There's no new precedent that's being established. This just takes existing law and existing court rulings. Now, it's not remotely constitutional because the Constitution doesn't require you to go through this stuff to begin with. The Constitution, as it's given by the founders, protects religious liberty. It protects the religious liberty of schools. They can decide whatever prayer they want to have. They can decide who gets to offer it. They can decide whether it's offered in the name of Jesus. That is religious liberty. There's no prohibition in the Constitution as given to the freedom of a school to do whatever they want when it comes to religious expression. But our courts have mangled it all up. But despite the mangling and the savaging that they've done of a gloriously simple document, still court precedent, court rulings, and existing case law indicate that these are the parameters. This is within the parameters that have already been established. And so this protects the right of students to inject a religious viewpoint into a classroom discussion. It protects the right of students to include religious content in their coursework. So if they want to write a paper, they want to do a book report, and they want to include religious themes in that, they cannot be prohibited from doing so. They've got the right to the free exercise of religious speech when it's dealing with coursework. They can form religious clubs. You know, we're reading stories all the time about Christian clubs getting kicked off of college campuses, not being allowed to form on high school campuses because they're Christian, because they're religious in nature. This law protects their right to do that. So you can have a what's the club for athletes? Fellowship of Christian Athletes. You could have an FCA chapter on your high school campus, no problem. And it also protects the right of students to wear clothing with religious themes. As long as other students are allowed to wear clothing that display symbols or express messages, they get to wear clothing that expresses religious themes and religious messages. And then the fifth provision is that they're obligated to create a limited public forum before school assemblies and before high school football games, for example, or other places, other school functions where students are allowed to speak. And they cannot tell those students what they can and cannot say during that 3 minutes. If they want to pray, if their form of speaking to the student body is to pray for them, that's a form of speech, isn't it? Whatever else somebody's doing when they're praying, that's speaking. That's freedom of speech, ladies and gentlemen, protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. So this is a beautiful piece of legislation. It's going to bring some real religious liberty to at least one state, and here I'm hoping and praying this is going to catch on and become a nationwide trend. Focal Point, AFR Talk, if you'd like to join our conversation about some of these things that we've been talking about. I talked about in the opening segment, what I'd like us to talk about, or any one of these three, when we talk about the open segment, is I believe God is looking for Americans that are going to ride this thing out, no matter how bad we trough out in America, because I think things could get pretty bad, frankly, in America. I'm not optimistic that we're going to be able to get through this thing without a pretty big implosion. What God is looking for, I believe, is Americans who are committed to Him, committed to His vision for this country, and are going to ride that thing out. They're not going to pack up and move off to Guadalajara, or pack up and move to New Zealand, or pack up and move to Australia. They love this country. They believe that God is not finished for this country, and they are going to write it out. I believe that's what God is looking for. That's why He had Jeremiah buy a piece of land days before the nation was destroyed and put it in an earthenware vessel that would protect the deed to that property for a long time. So Jeremiah was taking the long view of God's redemptive process, and I believe He's looking for Americans like that today. Love to know what you think about that, your reaction to all of that. Then we talked about how Child Protective Services can bust into your home and search your house based on an entirely anonymous and absolutely false accusation of child abuse and neglect. It violates every known principle of the Constitution that we've got. Love to know what you think about that. And then love to know what you think about this religious liberty law in the state of Mississippi. 888-589-8840. Now, here's one other thing you might want to weigh in on, and that is this. I've been thinking about this Supreme Court case on DOMA and Proposition 8. And by the way, a new poll out today from Reuters, only 41% of the American people support same-sex marriage. Only 41% of the American people want the Supreme Court to impose same-sex marriage on the United States. I mean, all we've been hearing, it's a slam dunk. The tide is turned. The consensus is now overwhelming. This is that you got to be on the right side of history. Don't get left behind. You got to get on the sodomy-based marriage bandwagon. And here's Reuters, I think it is, coming out with a poll. Only 41% of the American people support it. And so that's a switch of like 17 points in a matter of just a few days. So this clearly is far from a settled issue. But here is the problem I've got. And it's this. DOMA is a federal law. And I've got a column up at onenewsnow.com on this topic. And I may have to finish it up. I want to take some phone calls before we're done with this segment, so I may have to finish up my thoughts on the other side of the break. But DOMA is a law that was passed by Congress. It was enacted by our elected representatives, and it was signed into law by the duly elected President of the United States. It's a law. Now, when you have a law that is passed by Congress, like DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, then that becomes the responsibility of the executive branch to implement that law and to defend it if it comes under attack, because that's the job of the executive branch. Congress passes laws, and it's the job of the executive branch to implement those laws and to enforce them and to defend them when they come under attack. So that's the sworn duty of the Department of Justice, is to defend federal law. Well, DOMA's a federal law passed by overwhelming majority, signed by a Democratic president. What did President Obama's Department of Justice do? 2 years ago, they abandoned any pretext of defending DOMA, and they began to attack it instead. They began to undermine it. They are now actively, publicly, openly working for the opposition. They have switched sides from defending this law to now undermining it and attacking it. And what I want to suggest is that there is some gross judicial misconduct here. The parallel is this. Imagine you had a defense attorney. You've retained a defense attorney. You are his client. He's working for you. His job is to defend you in court. You're charged with something and you need to make a defense, and that's his responsibility. And so you work with him, and he is privy to a lot of information that you give him to help you with your defense. Now, he has a sworn and sacred obligation and duty to protect you and to give his defense of you the best he has to offer. That's his job. He has a sacred responsibility to give you the best possible defense he can. Now, occasionally attorneys have to drop cases. I mean, their caseload may get too much. They may feel like they don't have the expertise for it. They may just not have the time with the other demands. That kind of thing happens. I'm not talking about that, because that happens all the time. But what would you think if your defense attorney all of a sudden ditched you as a client, stopped defending you, and went to work for the prosecutor trying to throw you in prison? Now, the reality is if a judge an attorney pulled a stunt like that, he'd be disbarred so fast it'd give him a nosebleed. I mean, that violates every known judicial canon of ethics in the legal profession. And what I want to suggest to you is that this is what the Department of Justice has done. They've switched sides just like a defense attorney going from defending his client to joining the prosecution and trying to throw him behind bars. It's grounds for disbarment. And that's the point of my column today. Why hasn't the entire Department of Justice been disbarred over this egregious legal misconduct? Well, let's go to the phones, 888-589-8840. Let's go to Jeremy, Jacksonville, North Carolina. Jeremy, you're on Focal Point. What's on your mind?
How you doing?
Good.
This prayer in school with what's the impact of Muslims being able to do their prayer and all that?
Well, it would provide opportunity for Muslims to do it. Sure. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, because things are so cobbed up right now by judicial rulings, you can't prevent somebody from doing that if that's what they want to do, and the student qualifies and he gets on the list and he gets up in front of the mic and he wants to do a Muslim prayer, then he's going to be able to do a Muslim prayer.
I hear you. And then also the Child Protective Services can be called anonymously. They don't even need a name.
No, they don't. You know, and the implication is in this case, in wherever this was, Colorado, that it was New Jersey, that the Department of Family and Child Services didn't even know who made the complaint, know nothing about the person that made the allegation.
That's outrageous. I had a problem like that one time. Hey, I love AFR.
Great.
And another thing, I got another comment. The Constitution, you know, Americans fought for the Constitution. And my question is, did African Americans help fight for the Constitution?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, African Americans fought in the Revolutionary War, and African Americans fought in the Civil War. So, yeah.
So I'm going to have to look up on that.
Yeah.
I appreciate you guys.
Yeah, you bet they did. All right.
Radio.
Okay, Jeremy, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. Thank you. Focal Point AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. The program is Focal Point, Network is AFR Talk. Now, true freedom would be that a school should have the liberty to decide whether they want Christians and only Christians to offer invocations. They should have that right and do under the Constitution as it was given to us by the founders, not as it has been mangled by the courts. Now it's an all-comer deal. Focal Point AFR Talk.
We've got to find